Iran has dominated world headlines for decades. Conflicts that seem to have no end. Nuclear threats that keep the world on edge. Hidden alliances woven in the shadows of international geopolitics. However, what very few know, and what universities will never teach, is that the complete history of this nation was already written more than 2,500 years ago with blood-chilling precision. Not only is its ancestral origin documented in the oldest pages of humanity, but also its current role in world events, and, even more terrifying, its final destiny in the last days of history. Do you dare to discover why Iran is mentioned from the first pages of Genesis to the most feared and darkest prophecies of Revelation? Because it turns out that this nation is not an accidental player on the world stage. On the contrary, it has been carefully designed to fulfill a specific role in the divine plan that spans from creation to the end of times. Stay until the end of this revelation. Today you will learn something that academic institutions dare not teach and that international media deliberately omit. The true role of Iran in the divine plan that connects the most remote past with the immediate present and the prophetic future. Because when you finish reading this, you will never see the news about Iran the same way again. It all began in the waters of the flood that changed history. When the waters of the universal judgment finally receded and dry land reappeared, God left nothing to chance in that crucial moment of human history. When civilization had the opportunity to start anew, the Creator meticulously designed the map of nations that would populate the earth. Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the new fathers of modern humanity. But there was a hidden plan that would unfold over millennia. And it is precisely here where the story becomes chilling. Because in Genesis chapter 10, among the seemingly forgotten names and genealogies that many consider irrelevant, 2 ancestral patriarchs who would eventually change the course of world history were revealed, Madai and Elam. Madai, son of Japheth, would become the father of the Medes, that people of tough mountain dwellers who would inhabit the mountainous regions of the north, in what today forms part of Iranian territory. Meanwhile, Elam, son of Shem, would give rise to the Elamites, who would settle in the fertile plains of the southwest, near the Persian Gulf. Is it a coincidence that these 2 names appear together in the scriptures? Absolutely impossible, because God was literally planting the genealogical seeds of an empire that did not yet exist, but that would play a fundamental role in the redemption and judgment of his chosen people. The first prophetic war that changed the balance. But Elam's first appearance in biblical history was not exactly as an ally of God's people. Let's advance to Genesis 14, where something truly chilling is narrated. The first international war recorded in the Bible. It was not a minor tribal skirmish or an insignificant regional conflict. It was a massive invasion that would forever change the power dynamics in the ancient Middle East. For kings from the east, led by the fearsome Kedar-Laomer, king of the Elamites, formed a devastating military coalition that invaded Canaan like an unstoppable storm. These were not simple looters or nomadic bandits. They were an organized war machine with a specific objective: to conquer, plunder, and enslave. And they achieved it with terrifying efficiency. They plundered entire cities, enslaved complete populations, destroyed everything they found in their path. And in the midst of that devastation, they captured Lot, Abraham's nephew, taking him as a prisoner along with all his possessions. This is crucial to understand. Elam was not an insignificant tribe lost in the mountains. It was a regional military power with the capacity to project its power across hundreds of kilometers. But Abraham did not stand by waiting for someone else to solve the problem. With barely 318 trained men from his own house, this 75-year-old patriarch followed the invaders through the desert and confronted them in a night battle that defies all military logic. The result was an absolutely impossible victory, a victory that had no human explanation, and that left a prophetic message that would resonate through the millennia. No power from the east, no matter how organized and brutal, can prevail against those who have divine favor. Is this simply a historical coincidence? Current events in the Middle East will tell if this prophetic principle remains valid. However, the people of Elam did not disappear after this defeat. Centuries passed, generations were born and died, but those tribes that had been humiliated by Abraham continued growing in number, in strength, and in ambition. The Elamites and the Medes shared the same territory in ancient eastern Mesopotamia, and while great empires came and fell, a new force was preparing in silence. The most unexpected divine instrument in history. Let's advance several centuries until we reach one of the darkest periods for the people of Israel. Jerusalem had fallen. The sacred temple had been reduced to ashes. Thousands of Jews had been deported as slaves to Babylon, the most powerful and brutal empire the world had seen up to that moment. It seemed that God had abandoned his people and that the ancestral promises had been reduced to dust. But it turned out that God had already prepared his instrument of vengeance centuries before, the strategic union of Elam and Media in what would become the Medo-Persian Empire. And the most striking thing is that all of this had been announced with terrifying precision long before it happened. The prophet Isaiah, writing more than 150 years before these events unfolded, pronounced a prophecy that defies all rational explanation. God would use Persia as his hammer of judgment to punish Babylon for what it had done to Jerusalem and the temple. But there was a second prophecy, even more impactful, that would forever change our understanding of the divine plan. A pagan king of Persia, who had not yet been born, would become the instrument chosen by God to free Israel from exile and order the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And here is what chills the blood. Isaiah not only prophesied that this would happen, but he called this king by a specific name more than 150 years before he was born. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. How is it humanly possible to know the exact name of a king who would be born more than a century in the future? There is only one explanation that makes sense: direct divine intervention, the most impossible and impactful fall in history. For these prophecies to be fulfilled, first a sequence of events that seemed impossible had to develop. Cyrus the Great emerged as the leader God had promised through Isaiah. This young Persian king conquered Media, united the kingdoms into a single imperial force, and little by little became the greatest military power of his time. But his final destiny was Babylon, and the prophesied day eventually arrived. However, it was not a war like the others. There were no prolonged sieges, nor epic battles in open field. The fulfillment of the prophecy was much more dramatic and supernatural. One specific night, while Cyrus was preparing his forces outside the walls of Babylon, the impossible happened. The Euphrates River, which ran through the center of the city and served as its main defense, was diverted through an ingenious system of canals. The Persian troops entered through the now dry riverbed, while the Babylonians were celebrating a great feast. King Belshazzar, completely unaware of the danger, was drinking wine in vessels stolen from the Temple of Jerusalem. That very night, the famous writing on the wall appeared: Mean, Tekel, Upharsin. Before dawn, Babylon had fallen and Belshazzar was dead. The prophecy of Isaiah, written more than 150 years before, had been fulfilled with terrifying precision. And what followed changed history forever. The decree that changed everything. In the first year of his reign over Babylon, Cyrus issued a decree that would change the course of human history. He not only freed the Jews from their captivity, but ordered the reconstruction of the Temple of Jerusalem and financed the entire project with resources from the imperial treasury. This was a pagan king, a Persian who worshipped other gods, but who became the instrument through which God fulfilled his promises to Israel. Cyrus did not know that he was fulfilling prophecies written generations before his birth. He did not know that his name had been pronounced by a Hebrew prophet more than a century earlier. But he faithfully fulfilled his role in the divine plan. For decades, Jews returned to Jerusalem. The temple was rebuilt, the walls were restored, and Persia remained a protector of God's people for centuries to come. The Magi, the Persian connection to Bethlehem. But the most surprising Persian connection in the Bible is one that often goes unnoticed. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the first Gentiles to come and worship him were not Greeks or Romans. They were Magi from the East, scholars from Persia. These Magi had been studying the Hebrew scriptures for generations, possibly since the time of Daniel, who had been chief of the wise men in Babylon and later under the Medo-Persian Empire. They knew the prophecies about the coming Messiah. They were waiting for the signs in the heavens. And when the star appeared, they traveled hundreds of kilometers to bow before a baby in a manger. Persians, the same nation that had freed Israel centuries before. the same territory where Elam and Madai were born. Now they were the first from among the nations to recognize and worship the King of Kings. This is not a coincidence. This is the golden thread that runs through all of biblical history, connecting events that span millennia, the prophetic shadow over modern Iran. But here is where the story takes a much darker turn. Because the Bible does not end with the Magi, and Persia's role does not end with ancient history. In the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, a blood-chilling prophecy is described about a coalition of nations that in the last days will rise against Israel. Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. I am against you, O Gog, Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them. Persia is literally one of the first names mentioned. The same nation that once rebuilt the temple will now be part of a massive military alliance directed against God's people. The apocalyptic coalition that will change the world. This international alliance includes specific nations identifiable on the current map. Gog, Prince of Magog, identified as a leadership figure from the north, frequently associated with Russia or a Eurasian coalition. Persia, modern-day Iran, maintaining its original prophetic name. Cush, ancient Nubia, possibly regions of present-day Sudan. Put, North Africa, possibly including Libya. Gomer and Togarmah, regions near Turkey and the Caucasus. Together, they form a formidable international force that will launch against Israel. You will come like a storm, like a cloud covering the land. The plan that will fail catastrophically. The strategy will be apparently perfect from a human military perspective. They will attack when Israel is living in apparent security, thinking it will be an easy conquest. But this massive attack will provoke something the modern world has never seen: the direct and visible intervention of God. The judgment will be devastating and supernatural. Unprecedented earthquakes that will shake the entire region. Literal fire from heaven that will consume the invading armies. Total confusion that will lead the troops to attack each other. The visible glory of God manifesting in the midst of chaos. The result will be so obvious that nations will not be able to deny it. And I will be magnified and sanctified, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they will know that I am the Lord. Thus Persia will go from redeemer to judged, not because God has forgotten her, but because once again she will rise against his will and against his people. The definitive end of Iran? The answer will surprise you. After reading about the devastating judgment that awaits Persia in the war of Gog and Magog, a terrifying question naturally arises. Will Iran be destroyed forever? Will its history end in ashes as a testimony of what happens when nations defy God? Or will it have one last chance at redemption? The answer is hidden in an almost forgotten prophetic passage in Jeremiah, and it is more hopeful than most dare to imagine. The dual prophecy that changes everything. The prophet Jeremiah, writing centuries before Ezekiel, had already announced something that would completely change our understanding of this nation's final destiny. The word of the Lord came concerning Elam. Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the main part of their strength, and I will bring upon Elam the four winds, and I will scatter them to all these winds. Up to this point, it sounds like total judgment. The bow of Elam, symbol of its military power, will be broken. Its people will be scattered like leaves in a storm. It seems to be the absolute end. But then comes the revelation that changes everything. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring back the captives of Elam, says the Lord. The final restoration. This is a dual prophecy of judgment followed by restoration. First, the devastating judgment will come, Ezekiel 38 to 39. But then, in the latter days, restoration will come. In the latter days, I will restore Elam. This passage changes absolutely everything because it reveals that, although Iran rises against Israel in the end times, its history does not end among the ruins of judgment. God, even in the most severe judgment, leaves open the possibility of redemption. The Iran we see today in the headlines, aggressive, defiant, surrounded by dark alliances, will also be part of a restored world if it turns its heart toward God. For it is prophesied that in the final days, after all the judgments, the surviving nations will go up to Jerusalem to worship the King. And it shall come to pass that all who survive of the nations that came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King. Perhaps among those nations will be Elam, perhaps Iran, The one who was Redeemer with Cyrus, enemy in the coalition of Gog, and judged in the final war, will also be a witness of the restored glory. Because in the heart of God, there is still room for those who return. From Genesis to Revelation, the connecting thread, Persia has been present as a central protagonist in the divine drama. In the flood, God specifically named Elam and Madai. With Abraham, Elam manifested as the first threat from the east. In Babylon, Persia was the chosen instrument of liberation. In the temple, a Persian king financed the reconstruction. In Bethlehem, the Persian Magi were the first to worship the Messiah. In the last days, Persia will be in the final coalition against Israel. In the restoration, the nations will go up to worship in Jerusalem. The history of Persia becomes a perfect mirror of the universal human experience, redeemed, fallen, judged, but with the possibility of final restoration. If Persia finally turns its face to God, its history will not end in ashes, but in eternal glory. Even so, we have the question that defines our time. Where exactly are we in this prophetic chronology? After exploring all this revelation that connects ancestral events with current realities, inevitably the question arises that each person must answer. Do you sincerely believe that Iran is fulfilling its specific prophetic role in the divine plan today? We live in times where prophecies are activating silently, where what seemed like ancient history is more alive than ever. The events we see in the Middle East are not geopolitical coincidences, but the meticulous fulfillment of a script written millennia ago. In what exact part of this prophetic chronology do you believe we find ourselves? Are we seeing the first signs of the coalition that will rise against Israel? Do you see evidence of these prophecies in today's headlines? The alliances that Iran is forging, the nuclear tensions, the multiplying conflicts. All of this could be much more than ordinary international politics. We could be witnessing the prophetic prelude to the final events. If this revelation impacted you, it was not by chance. If you have made it this far, if something in your spirit has resonated with these prophetic connections that transcend time, it is because it was no coincidence that this information reached you at this moment. In times when prophecies are activating and world events are accelerating toward a climax that very few understand, it is crucial that those who have understanding share it. Comment now. What specific prophetic sign do you believe is being fulfilled today in relation to Iran? Have you noticed connections between current news and the prophecies you just discovered? Like this video if you want us to continue revealing how current events are directly connected to biblical prophecies that most have never heard. Share it immediately, because that way we will know that we should continue unveiling more prophecies that are being fulfilled literally before our eyes, but that academic institutions and mass media deliberately ignore. Are you ready to go even deeper into the prophecies? If what you just discovered about Iran has opened your eyes to realities that transcend superficial news, then you are prepared for the next revelation that will completely change your perspective on current times. Click now on the video appearing on screen, The Incredible Story of Daniel, to identify the Antichrist. Daniel left written the specific signs you need to know to understand what is coming.